Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says the president is going to get a fight over the debt ceiling, whether he likes it or not. And some of his colleagues are already putting out plans that show how the country's borrowing limit might be used as leverage. With me now, Tennessee Republican Senator Bob Corker. Senator, Happy New Year, and welcome back to now the 113th Congress. I guess you guys will gavel in about 3 hours. That's right. For that.
At a 24-hour break? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. A 24-hour break wasn't much of a transition. Let me start with, I know that you wanted, how did things end? How concerned were you that here you had Senate Republicans basically united around a deal nobody was happy about, but a deal that you felt you had to support, and that House Republicans almost undid it? I mean, describe your feelings about that as you were watching that on January 1st.
You know, I never thought it was going to be undone. I mean, let's face it, this was not a bill anyone really liked. And at the end of the day, Chuck, you can always run from these votes. On a big vote like this, I consider them to be defining moments. I always have to look at myself as the deciding vote. In other words, would we be better off as a country with this policy in place, or the policy that it's replacing? And I think if you look at it that way, there's no question that it was the right vote, but it was a terrible bill, and candidly, we'd have come out with a much better product if we just done it on the Senate floor in public. But now we have to move down the road to this next phase, and it's a shame, Chuck, that we live in this wonderful, great nation, the greatest on earth, and that leaders, all of us, cannot just come together and figure out a way to solve this problem that we have of huge deficits. Unfortunately, you have to use these leverage points, and so we move past the revenue.
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that because you were not a fan of using the debt ceiling as leverage. Just 2 years, September 2011, I want to read a statement you said. I do agree with the fact that having these debt ceiling debates in the middle of an economic downturn that we're having right now is not healthy, and there's no question that business people, those people that hire employees across our country, watch this and become uncertain. And yet you're now, and you and your party are saying, well, we're going to do this. And I saw Pat Toomey, he's willing to shut down the government over it. Are you willing to shut down the government over this?
Well, Chuck, let me go back and say I wanted us to pivot from revenues about 5 weeks ago and sort of laid a breadcrumb trail towards the end that we achieved, but I hope we would pivot immediately to entitlement reforms. The president showed that he just really doesn't want to deal with that now, and unfortunately the next line in the sand is the debt ceiling. And so when you look at us, the president voted against a debt ceiling increase when we had a 62% debt to GDP. We're now at 105, and we're redlining that. I mean, it's rising dramatically. And so I don't know how you get this president to look at spending reductions. You know, he said in the negotiations with Speaker Boehner that he'd offered $1 trillion in cuts, and I think you do a great job, Chuck, but nobody in the media has ever pressed him for the actual specific list of cuts. So here we have a situation where we've never received
But let me stop you there a minute. Let me stop you there a minute, because I understand this whole issue, and I feel like I get this now from both. The culture we live in the media is both sides are afraid to put out the details. Because
put them out.
You can kill, but I know you have, but leadership won't. The House Republicans didn't do it either. And the reason is this. You know as well as I do why details don't get put out. Because there's always a special interest group that can kill an entire plan because of leaked details. Isn't that part of the problem?
Well, I think we'd be so much better off. I have laid out a very detailed plan. Actually, Chuck, even for the grand bargain, I sent a copy of legislative language to the White House, to Harry Reid, to McConnell, to Pelosi, to Boehner, to say, look, this really isn't that hard. Now that we've moved beyond that, I have a $1 trillion entitlement reform package for a $1 trillion debt ceiling increase, and it is very, very specific. I think if the White House would go ahead and show us what those $1 trillion in cuts, again, that no one has ever seen, nobody on the face of the earth has ever seen outside, I don't think it exists, candidly, but if they would put that out right now, Chuck, this debate could move along so much more quickly, and we could look like adults here instead of having to use leverage points to get us to a place to save this nation. I mean, this is all about one thing, is it not? And that is us having the courage to lay our cards out on the table in public and save this country. And there's no question that we have to have entitlement reforms. In Medicare, Chuck, and I know you know this, maybe your listening audience may not, people who use Medicare today pay for 1/3 of its cost, 1/3. And there are 20 million more Americans coming on Medicare over this next decade. Now, you have to be a lunatic to not want to address that issue now so that it's here for future generations. And yes, people are going to be upset, but this is what people do. This is what generations before us did to keep this nation great. So look, I hope we don't get to the debt ceiling line in the sand, but I'd rather us go ahead and be responsible now for this than kicking the can down the road. This quarter could be great. Okay.
Where are you on filibuster reform? I know that this is actually cuts across party lines here. Would you like to see some changes in how the Senate conducts business on filibusters?
We actually, Chuck, you know, it's not the rules right now, it's the behavior of people in the Senate that is keeping it from working, and really, candidly, at leadership levels, too. My sense is that the two leaders are going to sit down and come up with some reforms that will help us now that we've seen that senators, you know, act with excess here in the United States Senate. But I think we need to do it in the normal fashion where we do it with a 2/3 vote. And Chuck, I really believe that's what's going to happen. I think there's been a bipartisan.
We're going to start seeing two-thirds votes above 60.
Well, no.
Oh.
When you change rules, typically on the first day of the Senate, you do it with a 2/3 vote. And my sense is that the two leaders are going to figure out a way to put some reforms in place that work for our nation, but do so in a way that they come together and make the recommendations together. I really think that still is what's going to happen here. But there's no question, Chuck, senators have become very selfish in the way they conduct themselves on the Senate floor. And we got to move towards more comedy to actually address our nation's issues. And I think we're going to do that this year.
I think there's universal agreement on that front. Senator Bob Corker, Republican from Tennessee. Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.